Good morning, everyone. My name is Frank Oefen. I am the co-founder of the CLAS Foundation, and I welcome you to our French Student Living Forum, our first forum again to focus and dedicate specifically to the French market, which, as the video just showed, is of course a very, very attractive place for many students to study. Not just the international students, but also a growing number of French students that really rely on us to provide them with housing solutions that enhance their experience and help students connect and live a good and carefree life, hopefully. We have fantastic speakers for you today, but I think it's very good to understand also that from our perspective, the French market has been a very interesting one that we have been following, but now also a growing number of partners of the class are active in the market. So it's a very good moment to bring everyone together and to discuss what are some of the issues that the French student living market are facing. The conversation today will be moderated by my colleague Kellyanne Watson and Marcus Roberts from Savills. And Marcus has been an expert in this market and many years of experience. So it will be very helpful for all of us to also have him guide the conversation and provide the insights into the market. We will have a couple of conversations that both will look at the private sector side, the investor side, the operator side, as well as the policy side. So we're very delighted to have Natalie and Olivier that can provide insights from the higher education perspective, as well as from the policy and the government side. And the key questions that we would like to discuss today is what is the strategy from the French government side? What are the higher education sector trends that are basically influencing both the supply as well as the demand side? We also are looking for insights in what exactly is either enabling right now the new developments in the French market, or maybe also still bottlenecks and things that stop the provision of new housing solutions for students. And of course, also like how we can collaborate together and establish more dialogue and understandings of where we can solve some of the issues. And that's also what the class has always been about. We started in 2010 in the Netherlands because there was a growing problem with the supply. It was not meeting the increasing demand and also the changing housing needs of students, especially due to increasing internationalization. And I think French students are facing the same issues at this moment. An increasing mobility as well as changing programs like really puts a lot of pressure on the market. And today we will hear more about what that does to to the market, and not just in the capital city of Paris, but also across the country, where a number of partners have indicated that we really need to collaborate and work together because there is still not enough housing for students. Before we start, I also like to make you aware of some of the features that we have in this online conference that will help you also participate. And also we'd like to hear from you what your perspective is. So we will launch some polls where we ask you for feedback, and those will hopefully be visible to you. And it's just for us a great indicator, and for the panelists also to hear from you what you think about the issues that we're discussing. If you want to ask a question, there will be a Q&A towards the end of the session, but please use the chat already to ask your questions so the moderators can pick those up. And also, if there's any other questions that maybe are not for the panel, but for the class, please also use the chat for that. And then at the end, we have a network opportunity for those that haven't met each other or maybe wanted to catch up. We will create breakout rooms for people to follow up. We've introduced this feature earlier this year in one of our sessions around the Nordics, and it was a great success because a lot of people were quite eager to continue the conversation after the main session. So please take advantage of that. So with that, I will hand over to the moderators, and hopefully you'll enjoy this session, and we look forward to have your feedback afterwards so we can continue the conversation about this really, really important market in the European higher education and student living community. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Kalyan, do you want me to sort of kick off now? Apologies if you can hear some pinging. I'm not quite sure, that's some emails coming in, but I'm just going to run through a quick sort of data insights on the student housing market, sort of pan-Europe to start with, and then we'll get into more details around the French market with it. I'm sure will spark some conversations and comments over the next hour and a half or so. So what I just thought I'd do is just look at a quick snapshot of the European supply and demand dynamic, and this is quite sort of compelling really when we look at the French market that is the largest by sort of a couple of 100,000 in Europe, with 2.97 million students, just pipping Germany. I think alongside this is the fact that there are about 440,000 bed spaces in the marketplace, which again puts it as the second largest market in Europe behind the UK. But I think coupled with that is of those 441,000 beds, about 62% is actually sort of publicly operated, with only about sort of 40% then as in the private sector. By the private sector, that is both institutionally owned and something that is a sort of the French market has been predicated on for about sort of 30 years or so, is the fractional sale ownership, whereby operators put long-term leases in place and then the units are sold down unit by unit to individual investors due to there being tax breaks available to them. And I'll probably leave it there on that particular point because I start to get out of my depth when talking about tax. But I'm sure the investors and developers on the call will certainly pick up on that. And that, I think, is one of the roadblocks I see about the developing direct let market in France. If we just look at Germany, actually, Germany's got about 210,000 beds, of which about 70% is owned by or operated by the Studentenwerk, by the public sectors, with only about 30% then in private hands. So if you actually drill down further in terms of the actual real supply and demand, when you look at what I would call fit for purpose PBSA in this modern environment, there's only about 2 or 3% of students in each country, in France and Germany, that can access quality accommodation that has sort of moved on from those that were designed by people like myself, showing my age, from the sort of 90s and sort of early 2000s to what is being delivered now by the likes of Clay, Uxco and Eclat in the marketplace. Hang on, could we just move on to the next slide, please? So if we're just looking at what's been happening in the sort of pan-European world and then looking at sort of how that sits in terms of a sort of French context. The French market has been dominated in the past by sort of French institutional investors. And it's only in the last probably 5 years or so that we've started to see sort of a real movement away from those core investors and actually further international investors starting to break into the market. And I would say, the largest advocate of that is the likes of Brookfield with their partnership with HPC, So private equity really sort of driving that market forward and starting to develop large-scale PBSA. To be fair, Oaktree and their clay brand did emerge in the sort of mid 2015-16s before their portfolio was sold to AXA, and then becoming probably the largest provider or owner of PBSA in France. I don't actually have a real breakdown, unfortunately, of the number of bed spaces that were transacted between institutional investors and those that were sold into the fractional sale market, because I think that would again be sort of quite compelling to see where the challenges are in that particular sphere, and that's sort of a bit of a quirk of the French sector compared to other markets. But as we've seen, the sort of the bar chart on the left hand side shows the growth of student housing transactions over the last sort of 5 years, and we've got that peak in 2019 as the first sort of key transactions where private equity had started to emerge as developing platforms in countries such as Spain, France, Germany, and the Netherlands, and then starting to exit to institutional investors. And I think this is going to be a theme that we will see over the next 2 to 3 years as further platforms are sort of amalgamated, probably some further M&A, and then disposed of at the sort of the particular point in time. If we just move on to the next slide, please. So again, we're just listing some key transactions here on a pan-European basis. We've got the top sort of 5 or 6 in France there, and which again I think is a really good barometer that actually there is. The market doesn't just stop at Ile-de-France. There is that regional market, and I think as we go through this year and over the next few years, so those markets will further develop and become far more competitive. In terms of other European transactions, we've seen some platform sales in Denmark with Patrizia buying Bleak House from DFI. And then we've seen Project Ruby in Dublin, again a sort of sale there, which was a sort of larger scale transaction, together with Ressa that closed last year, which is about sort of 800-900 million euros, the sale of about 43 assets in Spain to PGGM, who are an infrastructure-based investor. Based out of the Netherlands, but investing in PBSA in Europe for the first time. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So as we start to look at sort of where the sort of yield evolution has sort of come from, we've seen that the likes of France, like Germany, is sort of considered as one of the of Europe's most mature markets. Due to the compressed yields, it has shown slightly more sort of sensitivity, with prime yields currently between sort of 3.75 and 4%, largely based on market sentiment and anecdotal evidence at this point in time. But as we know, where interest rates will go over the next sort of 6 to 9 months, we're not quite sure. There's rumours that the EZB might start to move those out by another sort of 50, 75 points, but that remains to be seen, and what impact that has not just on this sector, but real estate as a whole across Europe. I think that importantly is the lease model to date. It's meant that yields have stayed lower due to sort of more risk-averse investors. And as I say, it goes back to how the market's sort of been predicated in France, with schemes of 100 to 150 units being developed with lease wrappers and being sold down to institutional investors or on that fractional sale model that I mentioned. We've yet to really see a raft of direct let sales sort of come through in the market. The likes of Clay have been buying off Vefa and then developing and operating those. And the same with Uxco and Eclat. But I think that's something that again we'll start to see see happen, and it's an opportunity for institutional investors to enter the market, but also take occupancy risk and capture full rental growth, which is something that most of them have invested in PBSA in the UK and other countries and taken that occupancy risk. So they understand now what the risk reward is around operating PBSA, and indeed build to rent, where they are where they have that exposure. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So again, what we have here, this is the 5-year CAGR from 2016, and that was at 3.3%, and that's now moving towards sort of 2.5 to 3 million in 2021. With the 2-year CAGR of 29 was up 4.9%. From 2.7 to 3 million students in 21. The reason for this, I think, is thanks, probably part, and this is something that I'm sure Olivier and Natalie will comment on later, is thanks to the French government creating travel corridors for international students, the finalisation of Brexit, dare I say it, greater domestic enrolment due to more relaxed university entry requirements as well, and fewer French students actually studying abroad. Overall, I think this starts to really apply pressure to the supply and demand dynamic that we see today. Onto the next slide, please. So why do students choose France? Well, I think it's one of the top countries of origin of students in France. The most significant increases are those of Italy, now with about 19,000 students, and Spain with about 11,000 students, and actually Lebanon with about 10,000 students, and that's up for about 30%. I think for French nationals and the EU students, all public universities are free of charge for a large percentage of European countries, such as Italy, Finland, Sweden, and Denmark, and Germany. Regardless, there are always some exceptions. But I think, aside of that, I think what we are seeing is a real reset of student housing from what was being supplied over the last sort of 25 years or so to what I would call PBSA 2.0 in France, with larger scale, more amenitized product. Sort of compared, which is what we're seeing in many other jurisdictions in Europe. And I think perhaps sort of France has had a couple of bottlenecks that are starting to be uncorked and enable these schemes to be developed and operated successfully. And it'll be interesting to see what the panel say about that and what feedback they have had from their residents. Onto the next slide, please. Again, it's just a sort of simple breakdown of supply and demand dynamics. We've talked about the shortage of supply in relation to high demand, increasing student numbers, and so on and so forth. So there's probably not too much more to say here, other than I think that France has about 10 top 250 universities when ranked globally. And I think that again is sort of quite a compelling market when you look at the fact that education has moved from being a very inward-looking service to far more of having that sort of global reach. Next slide, please. And then, this slide I think sort of says quite a bit in the fact that we've got 10 cities across France with student populations of over 100,000. And I think that sort of tells a lot when you then look at the right-hand side, the table there, and that's the private provision rate. So I think, I think we'd all agree that there is a huge potential here, untapped potential. But how deep that potential goes, I guess, again, we'll start to explore as to whether there'll be sort of cultural challenges around students wanting to reside in PBSA. Is there the affordability issue as well that I'm sure will come into play? But also, how do we, as a cohort, work with the universities to provide what they want in terms of in terms of retaining their students, but also providing accommodation that is fit for purpose in the modern and meets modern day students' expectations, not just domestic, but globally. We've got to think about this as a global issue. Next slide, please. This is the competitor landscape, and I think it's for some fairly sort of self-explanatory, but I think not least to say that we talked about Oxco, Eclat, and Clay as being sort of private sector together with there's the Gecina have their brand as well, which is direct let rather than being a lease product. A lease product being really everything that is on the left-hand side of this table. So you start to see how deep that market is, and I think how entrenched it is in French sort of real estate psyche. On to the next slide, please. I think this is the final one. I'm sure you'll be glad to hear. But I think in terms of the outlook for the French market, I think it is exceptionally positive. I would say that, wouldn't I, as a real estate advisor? But no, genuinely, I think the market has huge potential. I think it's exceptionally liquid. I think the investors understand now the operation of these assets, and Joe, I'm sure we'll talk about this later on. But I think you've got aging stock, and if we went back to the previous slide, looking at the age of that accommodation, that's a challenge that is coming up pretty quickly, not just in France but across Europe, in terms of the age of particularly the public held assets that need capex. They've had sort of capital constraints in many countries over the last sort of 5 and 10 years, and haven't been able to invest that into their real estate. And I think as there is more and more pressure to hit ESG requirements, so there is going to have to be some form of, in my view anyway, public-private participation as to how we can improve these assets. They're built and operational for starters, which is key, bearing in mind where construction costs are, and how we can deliver that quality accommodation. So there we have it. So a very quick sort of whistle-stop tour through European market, but touching on, I think, some key points around the French market in particular, and some challenges, but a huge opportunity. Kellyanne, over to you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Marcus. Lots of really interesting information there, especially to hear about the differentials between nearly 3 million students, one of the largest cohort in Europe, but then also the opportunity there for us to develop and build more student accommodation, but also bring that old stock back up to the standard that we are wanting to deliver as a sector as well, and I guess the expectations from students. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give a quick overview of our panelists today and the organizations that they've come from, so we can kind of get a map of who everybody is. So we've got Clay Group, who was founded in 2014 and was acquired by AXA, who is also on our panel as well. And in less than 5 years, Clay has become one of the leaders within the French private student housing market as an investor, operator and owner, and run accommodation within 12 French cities. So really excited to have them here today. Obviously, AXA Group doesn't really need much of an introduction. One of the largest and global leaders in investment management, has nearly 1,000 billion assets under management, and very much focus on this ESG agenda. We have Oxco Group, who's actually a new partner here at the CLAS Foundation. So we're very excited to have Oxco as part of our panel as well. Is one of the leaders within the French residential markets, with managing over 10,000 beds across 60 different student and co-living residencies. We have Catella, again, who is at the forefront for offering ESG, but also more affordable rents as well. And they currently hold 3.4 billion in property assets under management across Europe, 6 PBSA properties in France. I'm very excited to have Olivier here from Campus France. which is a French agency which promotes higher education, international student services, and international mobility for France, and really gives a 360-degree holistic support in terms of the admissions process, visas, immigration, finding accommodation, and basically just welcoming these international students into the country. And then University of Lorraine, we had that wonderful video from a student and his journey, which I really enjoyed listening to, which is home to 62,000 students. 9,500 of those are international students, and really is at the forefront for leading the Erasmus mobility programs. The university also offers multiple different courses from undergraduate to postgraduate. And yeah, so we have a very full panel here today to be able to talk about some of the things that Marcus was mentioning. I think, Marcus, it'd be really good if we just go straight into the kind of the HE kind of government strategy and vision for kind of universities. So I wanted to ask Olivia and Natalie, welcome to the panel and thank you for joining us. What is the strategy adopted by universities to kind of market themselves more internationally to secure more international students? Natalie, can I start with you?
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everyone. So, yeah, actually a few words about Université de Lorraine. We are 65,000 students, so we are one of the third largest university in France, and we host about 16% of the students who are international students. We are a comprehensive university, and we are spread all over the Lorraine area, and mainly in two cities, Nancy and Metz. We are located in a quiet and strategic area of France because sorry, I was muted.
I'm really sorry, Natalie. For some reason, it sounds like a Hoover's happening in the background. I'm not quite sure. Maybe we could mute you and move you over to Olivia once we sort your audio out.
Thank you for having us in this panel, having Campus France in this panel. Yes, I can provide briefly some words on the general strategy that France has developed since the beginning of 2019. Maybe I can share. May I share, please, a couple of slides? I think it has to. So. About this strategy, it was a new strategy for promoting higher education and internationalization of higher education in France, thought of as of the end of 2018 and launched beginning of 2019. Right now, I cannot share any slides. I think it has to be activated. So this strategy is very ambitious. It launched in 2019. Its aim was to reach a goal of 500,000 international students as of 2027. And at the time, there were about 300,000 international students in France. So it was expanding this number very much. Of course, this strategy relied on a number of different elements. One of them was to develop better hosting services at the level of the highest international standards. There was, I think, a general awareness at the time that hosting services in higher education institutions in France, but also the procedures students have to go through to open a bank account, to find housing, etc., were very difficult, and that didn't give a very good image of the country, and all that could be improved. So this was one of the main elements which was highlighted in this strategy. And a second part, which was maybe the one which was most discussed, was the development of the implementation of differentiated tuition fees for extra-European students. reaching a level of 2,700 euros for the bachelor's level and 3,700 euros for the master's level. The PhD level was excluded from this increase in tuition fees for extra-European students. And at this level, these tuition fees were still at 1/3 of the public cost of these programs. So they were still largely provided to from the state. The third element was to develop France's presence abroad, co-building new campuses in many countries in order to promote mobility to and from France. And of course, a general communication campaign was launched to promote France and develop this Welcome to France strategy. So that's for the general strategy. And
no, that's great. Thank you so much. Really interesting to hear about you building these kind of relationships as well with other countries. Natalie, do you want to see if you can try again with your audio?
Yeah, is it working?
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, okay.
Fabulous.
So, yeah, the strategy for Université de Lorraine is really, as Olivier said, how we welcome the foreign students. And as we are labeled with the Bienvenue en France program, one of our mission is to help foreign students in finding accommodation, because it's really the high topic question is where I am going to sleep tonight. So as we don't have any dormitories at the university, we help the students in finding a place to rent. And so we have different partnerships, either with the Crous, which is Hall of Residence, which is a public institution, but also with some private ones. And also there is also what we call the private owners market. So we work within a platform which gathers all the accommodation offers, and we really support the students at the beginning of the year, because the market is really tight at the beginning of the year, the academic year, I mean, from September to January. And then, but the market on the year from January to...
I'm very sorry, Natalie. It started again. Yes, I'm very sorry. Oh, I feel so bad.
Is it working by now?
It's not, no.
No, because my mic is open.
Oh, there we go. It stopped again. Don't we love technology? Yeah, we would have thought during COVID we would have figured it out by now. But yeah, sorry, carry on, Natalie.
Okay. So, well, I was saying that we are supporting our students to find an accommodation, and we have different possibilities for that. And but what I can say, it's always tight in the beginning, because everybody arrives in September, and most of the people stay until January. And it's true, either the students are international or national students, actually, because a lot of students give up their studies after the first term is terminated. So I shouldn't say the market is tight, because it's not tight during the year, but it's very tight just the first month of the academic year. And this is a problem that we have to solve, actually. So this is maybe what I can say for this first one. And the fact that we are in a trans-border area, a lot of people are working in Luxembourg, and they live in the city of Metz. And this makes the market very tight, because of course private owners prefer to rent their flats to people working in Luxembourg with high incomes, whether rent their flats to foreign students who are not supposed to stay more than maybe 2 or 3 years. So this is really tricky sometimes because of the area we are living in. So
yeah,
I think
really
it's a real issue for many countries, but France in particular is the lease contract, especially when talking to investors. How can they really sort of cash flow for a 12-month academic period when we have a 3-month break clause. You would sign up for 12 months, but it's 3 months and then just a rolling 1-month break clause thereafter. So, you're going to have this sort of very staccato cash flow, which, increases the costs for the operators, for the investors. And, there's not just the likes of Clay, but the likes of Odalis as well. Who are then going to have to re-let these beds. It'd be good to talk through, Olivier and Nathalie, around what those sorts of intakes look like from a number of students or percentage point with your knowledge from September to December, and then what sort of percentage intake comes in January through to March, April time, if you have that.
I don't have that number specifically, but there is a large number of mobility degree-seeking students who all arrive in the fall period. They represent, I'd say, about maybe 2/3 of student mobility to France, while the rest would be exchange students who would come for a 1 semester period, either first semester or the second semester. That gives an indication.
No, that's helpful. I mean, operators will need to make their margins in that first 3-month period or 4-month period, and then sort of try and backfill from there. I'm sure that's something that Jo Segelen and Juliette and Lars will comment on later.
Yeah, why don't we segue over to maybe Jo from AXA and maybe discuss about some of the challenges that maybe you're currently seeing is being faced in the French market, particularly within PBSA.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I think there's a number of barriers to entry into the French market, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to enter it, knowing that the competition would be a bit slow to follow through. And there's a number of reasons why. Marcus touched on a few during his presentation, but principally, it's quite parochial still as a market. It's not as open as, say, Spain, for example, where international investors can go in and do business quite easily. In France, they're a little bit more tentative, I would say. You need to have boots on the ground, a presence. You need to have connections, networks with the local councils, maries, to be able to really understand how that market works. And then there's also the issue of actually finding sites or stock. So when you're looking at trying to do developments from the ground up, it's very difficult to find sites of scale. So as we know in PBSA, you need ideally 250 plus to start your operations, looking more efficient, should we say, from that size upwards. And it's quite difficult to find plots in the right locations. Secondly, you can look at existing buildings, but again, the scale there is difficult to find. And you've also got quite a lot of legacy of these old buildings where you've got today's front and center issue, which is ESG, and being able to convert these buildings into modern PBSA that also meet the required standards of ESG factors today and into the future. So there's a number of issues, and that's why you've seen, and Marcus hinted on it earlier, that the way that a lot of investors are entering is they're buying existing stock that has been built up or refurbished by private equity players, venture capital players, to be able to get a foothold in the market and then base their presence from there and then grow. We've been fortunate that we bought or acquired Clay, and they're obviously based in France and very active, and have got a very strong team that are able to source sites through their own networks and through their contacts. So it's a lot easier, but principally you need to be on the ground in country and not think that you can just enter and manage from a distance like you could in potentially some of the other markets that we're in.
I think that's a nice handover to Segaline then. Segaline, it might be interesting for you to maybe tell us a little bit about some of the challenges that you've faced, and I guess some of the opportunities, what worked and what hasn't worked then.
Mm-hmm. So as Joe said, I think the local mayor are really important when you try to develop some PBSA in France. So you need to know that in France they have the choice to decide if it will be a residential, tertiary, or a PBSA project on a land. So what we discussed last time was more, so you still have this opportunity to develop, but it's quite complicated, and you need really to be in contact, in a close contact with the local mayor. Or you can try a bit, now there is a new way to develop, is the way on the public university land. So some of them are launching some tender bid to develop some PBSA in their land. So it could be in the coming years a new way to develop PBSA in France.
Interesting though that stronger collaboration with the universities because of the struggles around land, potentially or might actually be the actually way to solve some of these, but then also building better relationships in terms of the student experience, delivering the student experience that they actually want as well. I wanted to ask Lars from Catella. Hi, thank you for joining us. Kind of how easy is it to find financing for student housing developments, and do you see any changes in this?
Yeah, I mean, that is, of course, an interesting question nowadays. So, of course, financing has become more difficult, but I wouldn't say it's particularly difficult for French PBSA because, on the one hand, as Marcus said in the beginning, France is a very mature market in comparison. So PBSA in France is quite accepted, and I think it was a lot more difficult to do it 10 years ago. And on the other hand, you have contracts where you conclude all the conditions beforehand. So you have fixed construction costs, you have these WIFA contracts that banks like to see, where you don't have any fluctuations in the construction prices that affect the investor and thus do not affect the bank. So I think that is more, easier nowadays than it used to be, and I think not more difficult for PBSA than in other asset classes. And I also think, of course, it helps when you don't leverage as much. So we usually just leverage about 20 to 40%, so around 30%, whereas others go with 50% and more. And I think if you don't have to do as much, it is, of course, easier. And then I think what might change is that operators are more a thing, that they provide security as well. And then, of course, it's a good sign to the bank that you don't have as much risk. So you take a bit of risk out. Although, of course, well, as Marcus says as well, you can achieve higher yields when you take the risk of renting on yourself. But I think that might be something that we see in the future, that that more operators are taken into it, and then you just take a bit of the risk out. And then, as Joe said as well, yeah, it always helps if you have a track record in the market, if you have people on the ground, and if you can really prove that you can do it on the market, and then financing, I think, is not that difficult for that market.
Yeah, it sounds like the importance of reputational positioning and branding of your organization as well is extremely important in this market.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Juliette, actually, GMG have got two brands. We've got Uxco at one end, and we've got the Eclat brand. What Eclat brand? What's the difference? And Eclat seems to be, you've got some big behemoths of student assets, sort of 1,000, 1,300 beds. How it'd be great to hear how those have been operating, leasing up, because that's sort of relatively new scale in the French market.
We're really lucky actually, because we're mastering the whole value chain to two extents really, because we are an hotel operator, we're developing ourselves, and we're PBSA investor operator. So we've got this value chain covered really in an horizontal, if I can say, way, but also vertically with our products, because as you said, Uxco and Eclat, even if the name of the group itself is Uxco, that also embodies two different products that we have. We have 25 years age in the sector, because we've been operating, Uxcos for 25 years. So Uxco product, I would say, is a standard a product that we have throughout, I'd say, 40 different cities in France. It's a very, very, simple, but also really standardized product with a gym, with a laundry. You've got all really you need, but we've pushed it into a certain XXL extent with the Eclat product. That's massive PBSA product that we imagined I'd say 5 years ago, and the first one opened in Massy Palaiseau in 2018, and to be honest, I'd say that the Eclat product to me is really about meeting all the challenges that we have. You, Nathalie, and Olivier were talking about the international aspect of the student, really market in France. But it's really what it's about. We've got cycles of students more and more flexible. We have Sciences Accueil as a partner, which is also a tremendous value, because we are helping out international students with all the administrative tasks, the bank accounts, the visa, everything that they would probably need. And to me, Eclat is about pushing it to a larger scale, but also pushing all the possible products that you can possibly give to the student, and making it really making this extra mile toward this full experience that you can embody. And it's what is really, because I am embodying the sales department at Uxco, and what I can say from the two products, sometimes you might say it's not easy to embody two products as a whole, because there's this premium product Eclat and this more standardized product Uxco. And to be honest, all the assets that we are going to develop in the next years will be driven by this Eclat strategy, that's Eclat sense of product, of service, and to me, mastering this whole value chain and these two products really level up this product in France. So
that's really helpful. I mean, sorry, just to cut in, because I think it'd be great to have Natalie's view from the university sector as to what her view, any sort of feedback they've had from the students, perhaps looking jealously at Eclat and Clay, going, wow, wouldn't that be great to have it in Metz? Has there been that sort of feedback at all, and when they're being put into Crous assets or homestays? What has been the student feedback, Nathalie?
Yeah, actually, the expectations of the students for accommodation are very variable among the students, because actually, the first is it really depends on the economic class of the students, from the country they are coming from, and the needs they have, because some of them just expect a comfortable, well, all of the students expect comfortable flats with quiet and environmental friendly flats. And but of course, the rental level is really important. And at the same time, some of the students prefer being close to the campus and have a tiny room, but they benefit from all the facilities from the campus, for instance, like sports or libraries. And some others prefer living in a city center and friends, being close to all the city facilities. And so it's really it's really diversified actually according to their lifestyle.
And is there a difference there between, and this may be something for Olivier as well, when we're looking at the international students? So there's sort of expectations between international and domestic students. You know, domestic students may be happy to go to something that is like a cruise because it is what it is, and they you know, grandparents stayed there, and you know it's an important service. Don't mustn't forget. Whereas international students, they can go on the websites. And to you know, Juliette's point, it's marketing. You know, it's got the glitz, it's got the karaoke rooms, but actually, you know, for your clientele, the international students, is it more about living the French culture, and so wanting to be in a homestay is actually what they're after?
Yes, very interesting question. Actually, we had a survey in 2022. We reached out to 10,000 international students in France from recent years, from the 3 recent years, and it turned out that half of them were living in Crous accommodation, so public housing. The other half was in private homes, either private rentals or other kinds of private homes. For example, living at renting a room in somebody's home. That what represented the other half. Of course, there are different options, and some of them are first in a type of public housing, and then they prefer for following years or for a following degree to find out their own apartment and to rent a place with other students that they have met during their stay. That's also a possibility. One of the main aspects that came out of our results of our survey was also the fact that international students, especially during this period, which was with the pandemic, were on very tight budgets. And their monthly budget on average was around 870 euros. So that's the monthly budget, and half of that budget was used on housing. And so one of our analyses of this was that a lot of international students, and of course it's various according to the different origins. I mean, some regions of origin are usually well, they have larger budgets and they're used to spending more for international student experiences, but others are very willing to have an international study experience in France, and even at the cost of having to find a less complete housing, to have to find a job next to their studies, and usually even though those conditions can be quite difficult, international students stay very positive on their experience in France.
Well, that's great, and you know, long may it can continue. I think what we talk about affordability and obviously, you know, rental price points. I mean, there's it's a real difficult dichotomy we have, because on the one hand, investors need to make their returns. Developers need to make their returns. Construction costs are probably at a higher than they were, a lot higher than they were sort of 12, 24 months ago. And yet, Lars, from an investment point, you're very focused on not just the E, you're focused on the S as well in your with your funds, and that's how do we work with the university? Because my view is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, and you probably will, that I think Catella and their investment appetite is certainly there to see in student housing, but it has to hit that criteria around the ESG. Is there, what interaction have you had with universities and perhaps Crous about sort of partnering up and seeing how we can you can hit the E, the S, and the G?
Yeah, that is a good question. Honestly, I can't really say about how partnering up worked in the past. So I'm also quite new with Catella, but we do indeed have the claim of providing rents at an affordable level. We usually do that by not aiming really in the city centers, but rather go for well-connected locations or near the universities that are, as we said, as we heard in the video in the beginning, quite spread out in Paris, for example, but also in other cities. And I think you can really go into locations that might not be the prime locations for classical residential, but might be for PBSA, and then rents can still be affordable compared to a private segment, and can at the same time be more accessible. And so that for the S part on really trying to provide affordability, but also I think that goes into the E part nowadays, because of course with higher energy prices, you also want to provide an asset that is mostly decarbonized, where you have low energy costs. And I think that works quite well with students too, that they are quite aware of climate change, of course. So they are the young generation who have to deal with it, obviously, but they are also higher educated. So I think they also profit from having a lower carbon footprint. So I think that works quite well, providing that for them. And our assets in France are quite new too. So we, even before the energy crisis really hit us, had an eye on that. And we are quite happy now that at least heating and the costs that go along with older and less energy efficient assets don't really hit us as hard. So don't hit us as hard, or don't hit the operators as hard. So I think that really goes together quite well.
No, thank
Marcus,
you. Sorry.
Yeah, no, Marcus, I was just going to say, it might be quite nice to summarize. I'm just concerned about the time. I know there's still a lot for us to even continue discussing. We will have these breakout sessions, and there will be a link in the chat for anybody who wants to join in the next 5 minutes once we just wrap up here. But I think sorry, I'm about to have to change rooms anyway, but I'll be back in the chat. So I think there's a few things. One is, I know we talk about lease length. I think that's potentially a real challenge for us about semester lettings, which great for you can probably sort of drive some rental, increase rents, but for a short period of time. You've then got the cost of remarketing, the operational cost, and the effect that has on your NOI. That has an effect on what you can pay for land. I think when you look at Lars, and we're all driving for ESG. ESG comes at a cost when you're looking at construction, and it either goes on the rent or it comes off the land value. And I think there's got to be a bit of navel gazing, as we call it, looking at developers, look at landowners about how we can deliver sustainable accommodation for our students. Personally, my view is we've got to look at the universities to do this, because many are, I don't know how many, but have got large land banks, may have redundant academic facilities that need replacing, repurposing. And so we need to look at, as a cohort, at how we can engage with the universities, Natalie, looking at critical sort of campus review of assets and land, about how this can be delivered in a sustainable.
and hitting
Yeah,
the
absolutely. And I just want to say a huge thank you again to Olivia and Natalie as well for your insights. I wish we could have dug a little bit deeper, but we will do afterwards. And thank you to the rest of the panelists. As I mentioned, we will be moving over to the breakout room. So please, in the link in the chat now, you can make your way over. Just like to say a special thank you to As4, our sponsor today, who has supported the making of this online session. I really hope you all enjoyed. Thank you again, and we will see you in the breakout rooms. And if not, we will see you in April the 20th in London for our first in-person event. So we will be in touch and we will speak soon. Thank you, everyone.